Welcome. Picture this in your mind's eye. It's a crisp, foggy morning in San Francisco back in 1950, and you're just an average person, maybe a barista hustling to open your corner shop, or a parent dropping off the kids at school. The city's buzzing with that classic Bay Area vibe, trams clanging, seagulls crying overhead. But up in the sky, out of sight and totally off your radar, a U.S. Navy ship is steaming through the Golden Gate, its crew releasing massive clouds of bacteria into the wind. For 6 straight days, from September 20th to 27th, this invisible mist drifts over the hills, seeping into homes, parks, and lungs without a single warning. Folks start coughing up weird pneumonia like bugs. Urinary tract infections pop out of nowhere, and at least one person ends up dead from it all. Sounds like the plot of a dystopian thriller, right? Well, it's not fiction. It's Operation Sea Spray, a real secret test where the government turned a whole city into an unwitting biolab. And that's just the tip of the iceberg in the wild, creepy saga of open air biowarfare testing we're diving into today. In this podcast, we're exploring how the US and UK governments transformed everyday skies and seas into a massive petri dishes during the Cold War era, what we've learned from the ethical wake-up calls since then, and why these stories are blowing up again in October 2025 from freshly declassified horrors like bacteria sprays over bustling neighborhoods to the latest buzz around the modern aerial whispers that keep folks up at night. Our key takeaways? These operations expose millions of regular people to the hidden risks without so much as a heads up. But they're also ignited tougher safeguards that might just shield us from tomorrow's bio headaches. We'll balance the gut punch facts with some fair pushback, chat about real health ripples, and even peek at how this ties in today's geoengineering debates. During this podcast, we'll dive into the history of the government actions, both revealed and rumored, to shed light where we might stand today and what hidden programs might still be unfolding, often without the public's knowledge or consent. It's crucial that you form your own conclusions, but do so with the weight of the past in mind. Decades of documented overreaches have left many rightfully wary of official narratives from institutions like the EPA or our federal government. Ultimately, the choice is yours. Trust the assurances or question them. That's precisely why I'm creating this series, to refresh our collective memory, cultivate a healthy dose of skepticism, and empower you to stay informed and discerning. We'll pay special attention to weather modification and geoengineering, building a compelling case that the hazy trails lingering in our skies aren't always innocent contrails from passing jets. Those persistent streaks that refuse to dissipate, they warrant a closer look. As we unpack these topics, I'll strive for balance, presenting perspectives from all sides, official denials, alongside whistleblower accounts, and independent analyses. In an era where legacy media pushes one storyline and alternative voices challenge it with fresh evidence, true understanding lies in weighing both. Remember, without irrefutable proof, certainty remains elusive. But the resources are out there, and the independent thinkers amplifying overlooked truths deserve our gratitude. Tune in with an open yet critical mind. And let's uncover what's really happening above us. All right, let's set the scene properly because this didn't just pop up overnight. It brewed in the paranoia pot of World War II when the world felt like it could end any second from a surprise attack. Imagine in the early 1940s. Bombs are falling across Europe, spies are everywhere, and leaders in the US and UK are sweating bullets over what if the enemy drops something invisible and deadly from the skies. That's when these two allies start collaborating like a pair of rogue inventors in a high stakes garage lab, kicking off outdoor tests for biological weapons that go way beyond safe little vials in a basement. They weren't content with contained experiments. No, they wanted to see how germs like anthrax or plague would behave in the real world, wafting on ocean breezes or drifting over enemy lines. The big question driving it all, could these bugs be turned into unstoppable weapons to drop on troops or even civilians? But here's the real hook that turns your stomach. What begins as a desperate wartime prep spirals into decades of tests that treat entire populations. This includes your neighbors, your grandparents, like disposable data points in a giant windy lab. Take Britain's infamous Grignard Island trial in 1942. For instance, it was one of the first big splashes into this dark pool. Scottish scientists working with the US loaded up bombs with anthrax spores and detonated them over a flock of poor sheep on this tiny remote island off the northwest coast, all to simulate how the germs might wipe out German livestock and starve the Nazi war machine. The results were brutal. The anthrax, it hung around like a bad guest, contaminating the soil so deeply that the whole 522-acre island stayed quarantined for nearly 50 years. No humans allowed. It took a heroic cleanup crew in the mid-1980s, armed with massive formaldehyde baths and seawater floods, to finally declare it safe in 1990. Hats off to those decontamination pros. I mean, they rolled up their sleeves and tackled a nightmare with straight up grit and chemistry wizardry that saved a slice of Scotland from being a forever no-go zone. But that was just the appetizer. By the 1950s Cold War chill, the US ramps things up at places like Dugway Proving Ground in Utah's dusty deserts, and both nations dive into the sea-based trials where ships drag animal cages behind them like grim fishing lines, blasting pathogens such as tularemia, the bug behind a nasty fever, or Q fever at the trapped monkeys and sheep to clock infection rates. Pulling from a declassified report that still gives me chills, one line sums up the cold calculus. Quote, biological efficacy of a bacterial cloud is expressed as a dosage required to give 50% infection or lethality. They're not just testing spread, they're crunching numbers on how many critters drop dead or get sick, fine-tuning the horror for human potential targets. And let's pause for a rhetorical gut check. If a rogue gust can carry those same germs across vast oceans or right into a crowded city block, what on earth stops it from crashing your family picnic or schoolyard recess? That's exactly how this wartime what if ballooned into a full-scale ethical catastrophe. one that exposed ordinary folks to threats they never signed up for. Oh, and what for that extra layer of, wait, what? Investigative journals like Eileen Wellsome have traced the secrecy playbook straight back to the Manhattan Project's radiation tests in the 1940s, laying the groundwork for what some call a 90-year chain of government experience on everyday Americans. Sealed files, denied risks, and all. Now, let's just fast forward through the decades because these ops didn't vanish with the war. They simmered on until the 1970s when the world started waking up to the madness. By then, the 1972 Biological Weapons Convention steps in like a global referee, slapping a ban on offensive bioweapons while letting defensive research slide under the radar. But the true mind blower, it's the slow drip of revelations that started in the late 70s and keeps leaking out even now in 2025. Back in 1977, for example, the U.S. Army finally coughs up details on 239 open-air simulant tests run in populated areas from 1949 to 1969. Think clouds of stand-in bacteria like Serratia mercescens dumped over places like St. Louis, or glowing zinc cadmium sulfide particles released to trace wind patterns under blacklights. And across the pond, millions of everyday Britons got an unwanted dose in spots like London and Southampton between 1955 and 1975, all under the banner of large area coverage trials meant to map out a nation's soft spots for attack. But the real thunderclap lands in 2002 when Congress pries open the lid on Project SHAD, a whopping 52 Navy-led tests from 1963 to 1973 that sprayed actual nasty agents like sarin nerve gas and tularemia bacteria over ships packed with sailors, plus monkey cages for good measure, all without full consent from the crews. Thousands of service members breathed it in during what they thought were routine drills in far-flung spots from Hawaii to the Panama Canal Zone. And if you rewind to the raw roots of this nightmare, the 1950s delivered even more visceral shocks. Open sea spray, that San Francisco fog I mentioned earlier, it just wasn't some one-off prank. It was a deliberate 6-day barrage from the Navy vessels, releasing Serratia marcescens bacteria to mimic a full-scale bioattack on all 800,000 residents. Declassified documents now speculate it fueled at least 10 illnesses and 1 confirmed death from rare pneumonia, with urinary tract infections spiking. Yet, the lasting health echoes remain murky as follow-up studies are scarce, even in 2025. Then there's Operation LAC, the Army's audacious large area coverage, LAC, push from 1957 to 1958, where they blanketed cities, including hard-hit low-income neighborhoods in St. Louis, with zinc cadmium sulfide, a fluorescent tracer laced with cadmium, that known carcinogen. Motorized blowers on rooftops of housing projects and schools puffed it out like toxic confetti, all to chart chemical drift for warfare sims. Fast forward to September 2025, and fresh reports confirm the Army's own admission. Over 10,000 folks in those St. Louis neighborhoods got doused, I should say, with residents blaming spikes in cancer, birth defects, lung woes, and reproductive glitches on the fallout. The Army still swears there was no health risk, pointing to old National Research Council studies. But those same reports, for good measure, urge deeper probes into whether the stuff breaks down into poisons in the lungs. But probes that never fully happened. Let me introduce you to Eddie, just a stand in for so many real Navy vets. And thank you, all the vets, for your service. From that era, he's out on deck off San Diego in 1968, cracking jokes with his buddies during what feels like a boring drill, the salty Pacific air filling his lungs. But decades later, he's wrestling unexplained respiratory flares and joint pains that doctors shrug off as just age until a declassified file hits his mailbox and suddenly it clicks. That drill was SHAD, spraying, I can't pronounce it, Streptococcus enterotoxin B, a gut wrencher of a toxin. Stories like Eddie's aren't rare. They're the human glue holding these outrages together, sparking fury over spotty health data that links test zones to weird infection clusters and chronic issues. As a fresh take from just this July put it, echoing across online chats, quote, Americans have been experimented on for at least 90 years by our criminal government. Shocking doesn't even cover it. It's the kind of reveal that rewires how you see trust in the skies above. But man, did it force a reckoning on ethics that we're still feeling today. Thank God for ethics. So with all that backstory simmering, you might be wondering, how exactly does a government pull off turning a blue sky day into a stealth biohazard without anyone batting an eye? It's deceptively straightforward, and that's what makes it so unnerving. Relying on tech that's equal parts clever and careless. At its core, these ops hinge on dispersal systems that weaponize the air itself. Think low or high flying planes fitting with spray nozzles, ships with onboard generators pumping out microbial mists, or even ground-based blowers perched on urban rooftops like silent sentinels. Early tests stuck to real heavy hitters, pathogens such as Bacillus anthracis for anthrax or Yersinia pestis for plague. But by the 1950s, they smartened up, or so they thought, and switched to these simulants. They were supposedly benign mimics, like this Bacillus glob G, standing in for anthrax, or that zinc cadmium sulfide for the LAC, chosen because they drift and settle, just like the bad stuff, but without the instant body count. Here's how it unfolds in steps, almost like a twisted recipe. First, the planners map wind patterns and pick up a vulnerable zone. Say a foggy harbor for sea spray, or a dense neighborhood grid in St. Louis for LAC. Next, they load up the vector. Bacteria cluttered in labs, mixed with fluorescent tags to glow under UV for tracking. Then comes the release. A ship chugs into position, fires up its compressors, and blasts aerosolized clouds that ride erratic gusts for miles, sometimes covering over 1,000 square miles in a single go. UK's Porton Down crew, for example, started with animal bomb tests before scaling up to ship-towered pontoons loaded with caged guinea pigs, detonating agent-filled explosives upwind to dose them precisely. This is engineered. The US echoed it with SHAD, where jets streaked over monkey boats in the Pacific, dumping Francilia turlianus while crews hunkered in sealed cabins, clocks ticking on exposure times. The wild card? Mother Nature. Shifting winds could redirect a plume from open water to a playground, or rain might dilute it harmlessly. But Doth Mass was ruthless. Success was defined as infecting or killing at least half of the test animals. Anything less was just a failed run, but they'd retry. Uncertainties piled up like storm clouds. How much gets inhaled versus settling on the skin? Does it linger in the lungs, breaking down into toxin over years? One botched UK sea trial saw animals shrug off the cloud entirely. In winds, the winds, half the batch kneeled over, proving the technology's punch. It's Russian roulette with the atmosphere as the revolver and the chamber. Your entire skyline on a random Tuesday. Ever catch yourself staring at contrails and wondering if that faint haze isn't just exhaust, as we're told, or an echo of something more engineered? That's the sneaky genius and terror of how these pathways worked. All right, let's just pull back the lens for the wide shot, because these weren't rogue basement projects. They reshaped the very blueprint of national security, science, and trickled right into the rhythms of daily life. From World War II's isolated animal islands to the Cold War blanket sprays over urban sprawl, the progression was chilling. Offshore puffs evolved into drifts that snagged sailors on decks, fishermen hauling nets, and kids chasing balls in schoolyards. All while planners patted themselves on the back for vulnerability assessments, health waves. They're debated fiercely, but a 2010 UK file release exposed civilian doses of brucellosis simulants that sparked lupus-style complaints. And in St. Louis, those zinc cadmium sulfide clouds from the 50s and 60s are still fingered for clusters of cancers and birth defects in affected blocks. I just can't believe it. Now, in our post-COVID world, where airborne scares hit home hard, these old ghosts amplify every cough. The U.S. National Biodefense Strategy from 2002 beefed up lab protocols, straight up crediting scandals like sea spray for birthing institutional review boards, IRS, those oversight boards that grill every human trial today. On the everyday front, your annual flu jab or city air quality alert owes a nod to Grignard's lingering curse, which haunted lawmakers into tougher rules. But the chatter doesn't stop there. Recent X-posts from October 2025 tie sea spray straight to geoengineering. Those persistent plane trails, some swear are loaded with aluminum, barium, and neurotoxins, among other things, for geoengineering, or worse, jacking up rates of Parkinson's and Alzheimer's while tweaking weather patterns. A March 2025 deep dive labeled it like this outright: this isn't just climate engineering, it's chemical and biological warfare, flagging aerosol technology for potential population targeting. Ethos of gene-tweaked mosquitoes, or even COVID swab sampling as bioweapon ruses, it goes on and on. Florida airports kicked off reporting on banned weather modification flights per a new law from October 8th, while online circles cheer the government shutdown for supposedly halting geoengineering. Even RFK Jr.'s MAHA released fresh October reports calling out persistent plane trails as toxic contrails, poisoning us for climate control. Wow. Hold that thought before we spiral too far. Well, let's just pump the brakes and toss in a little balance, because not every cloud has a silver lining of doom, and it's smart to question what appears to be hype. Sure, core stories like sea spray and LAC are rock solid declassified facts, but critics, and there are plenty of them, argue the panic dial gets cranked too high on the fallout. The simulants, Serratia marcens, was greenlit precisely because it's safe for humans, per Army logs, with no slam dunk proof of mass outbreaks tied directly to the sprays. Health hits? 2021 literature review dubs unintended exposures uncertain rather than a proven plague. And even the National Research Council in the 90s couldn't nail zinc cadmium sulfide as a St. Louis cancer bomb, though they did flag the need for lung breakdown studies that got shelved, as I mentioned before. And defense insiders push back hard. These tests armored against the real Soviet shadows, they say, potentially averting worse wars and saving untold lives in the long game. And on the geoengineering side, the EPA in July 2025, they say those lingering plane trails are just everyday contrails, frozen water vapor from jet engines freezing in cold air at high altitudes. No hidden chemicals or secret agendas there. As for Florida's new law requiring reports on weather modification flights, many critics dismiss it as symbolic, feel-good legislation. They say, after all, large-scale geoengineering projects are still mostly stuck in labs and computer models, far from ready for the real-world skies. That said, doubts persist, and for good reason. Flaws in old research methods keep the speculation alive, like those heavily redacted files from the 1950s that hide key details and make people wonder if the reported risks were played up for dramatic headlines. Ethically, things have come a long way after the Nuremberg trials exposed Nazi experiments and the Vietnam era eroded faith in government secrecy. Our blind trust in federal agencies all but vanished. We'd never stand for repeats today without massive pushback. So push back when necessary. Looking to 2030, experts from the National Defense University and the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists forecast a shift. No more wild, uncontrolled sky releases of weapons of mass destructions, they say. Instead, expect tighter, lab-contained experiments mixing cyber tools with biological tech, turning those chaotic open-air tests into a faded memory from another era. Fingers crossed. They're right, but let's stay skeptical. History has drilled it into us. Always question those rosy, all-clear promises. A September 2025 Congressional Weather Modification hearing fact-checked the frenzy, reminding us science isn't sorcery. Bottom line, the alarm bells ring true for accountability, but full freakout? Maybe save it for when the evidence stacks higher. Yeah, we'll freak out then. That's for sure. Okay, our coffee's gone cold, but fire's just warming up here. Time to arm yourself with a practical toolkit. Start basic but powerful. Crack open the Biological Weapons Convention docs. It's hitting its 53rd birthday in 2025, and it's your crash course in how nations pledge to ditch offensive germs while keeping defensive eyes peeled open. From there, hop online to nti.org and sign those petitions pushing for ironclad verification. No more sneaky labs slipping through the cracks. Hit up your reps with emails or calls, urging money toward ethical biodefense and R&D instead of anything that smells like aggression. It's low effort, high impact. Why bother? Synthetic biology and AI are barreling toward 2030 with designer bugs on the horizon. Your nudge today could tip the scales from threat to safeguard. Hey, grab Elaine Welsom's The Plutonium Files for a raw look at radiation secrecy hand in birthing these aerial operations. It's a page turner that spotlights why transparency isn't optional. And meet Sarah, our barista from Norwich, with a personal stake. She's slinging lattes by day, but her evenings? Lobbying local councils after learning her grandparents' 60s bronchitis stemmed from a simulant cloud that drifted over their street. She says, "It wasn't just history," Sarah told in a recent X-Thread. It stole her golden years, and now I'm making sure no one else's family pays that price. You can channel that too. Start with a neighborhood watch to keep your eyes on the sky. It all matters because history's loop only breaks when we grab the shears. Those tools turn passive scrolling into proactive power, ensuring the next generation inhales freedom, not poisoning fog. Well, we've taken our sweet time wandering from World War II's anthrax-ravaged islands to the Biological and Toxic Weapons Convention, or BTWC's hard-earned transformation and beyond, proving that society's tuned in its BS detector to finer pitch over the years. These tests carve a jagged scar in the story, no doubt, but they're hammered out rules that allegedly pulse through every modern vaccine rollout and air quality check. And I underline allegedly. On reflection, it's a tale of human hubris clashing with conscience. We got wiser through the wounds, learning that unchecked power in white coats or navy blues breeds monsters. But collective pushback forges the shields. Vigilance isn't optional. It's the oxygen keeping ethics alive, from the Cold War to the aerial engineering debates dominating October 2025 feeds. For a quick pivot into the wider web, this all knots up with the dual-use dilemmas. Like CRISPR's tech, that's a miracle for curing rare diseases 1 minute and a blueprint for tailored toxins the next. Or Zoom to AI's bioroll. By 2040, it might forecast pandemics to save millions or engineer them in shadows if our oversight lags, linking straight back to needing those global guardrails we fought for in the 70s. It's one tangled net, sure, but the solution is simple. Dial down the shadows of secrecy and crank up the light of scrutiny. Your move, crew. It's a strong call to action. If this episode left you reeling in the best way, drop a like to boost this signal and subscribe, please, for these are unfiltered chats every week, and share. Until the next time, peace be with you. Bye, everyone.